not an Australian Football League if it leaves off the South Island. And that's what's occurred for too long.
Tasmania all but confirmed to be granted the 19th AFL licence after a stadium funding announcement, but it's set to be several years before the side enters the competition. The Greens set to introduce legislation that would freeze rent prices as one of the party's senators tells Anthony Albanese to shut up about his childhood story. People watching the coronation of King Charles III next week set to be invited to swear allegiance to the monarch, and 5 people shot dead execution style in the United States, including an 8-year-old boy, reportedly over a noise complaint. Good evening. The time for the 19th AFL licence to be given to Tasmania appears to have come, with the decision set to be finalised following a funding announcement for a new Hobart Stadium from the federal government. The expectation is that Tassie won't enter the competition for a number of years, as details for the league's newest club are revealed. National reporter Austin Pollock has the latest.
A step forward for the 19th team in the AFL.
Done as an urban development project that will create enormous economic activity.
After a long time coming, the Prime Minister pledged $240 million to developing the Macquarie Point precinct in Hobart, with a brand new 23,000-seat stadium at the centre of it, transforming this into this. It's an amount that is causing quite the uproar in Tasmania and also federally, with the federal government facing pressures from state Labor, the Greens and federal Liberals, an issue the Prime Minister could not escape on Saturday.
Cole talked to me. I remember having a discussion.
Let's talk about housing, Prime Minister.
Do you want to? Yeah, I think you've had your say.
Well, haven't you? Having your say.
The Tasmanian government has committed $375 million, while the AFL committed $15 million and $85 million in borrowings against land sale or lease for commercial use. The development of a new stadium and potential entry of a team to the AFL is hoped to have significant economic benefits for Tasmania. With around 4,000 jobs to be created during the development of Macquarie Point, it will certainly also bring a huge increase to tourism for the state. But attention now turns to the AFL. It is all but certain now that Tasmania will get a licence for a new team to enter the competition.
It's not an Australian Football League if it leaves off the South Island. And that's what's occurred for too long.
That long-held, decades-old dream of having our own team, singing our own song in our own colours.
The league on Friday night reportedly met with all club presidents, confirming all the final details and addressing the concerns of clubs about a Tasmanian team. Another key detail now locked in though, the AFL won't have to pay another cent if the cost does blow out on a new stadium, a factor that might be key in seeking the approval of all 18 teams before the AFL Commission meets to finalise the decision before issuing the licence. In a statement from AFL boss Gil McLachlan, he said, "For a club to compete and succeed on the national stage, it needs a home that enables and empowers it to compete from the start, on and off the field." Adding on behalf of the AFL, I would like to thank the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the federal governments for realising the vision for the Mac Point precinct and all the economic activity the urban redevelopment will bring to the state. A new team will be added to the AFL, bringing the total to 19 teams. That is all but certain. Discussion now turns, though, to the addition of a 20th team to make it so there isn't a bye for one team every single round. But what is certain, Tasmania will get their own team. Gillan McLachlan and the AFL Commission to deliberate over the next few days, with an announcement to be made as early as Tuesday. Austin Pollock, 6 News.
An Australian man has been charged in Indonesia after being accused of spitting in the face of an imam at a mosque in the city of Bandung. Police say Brenton MacArthur was staying at a hotel right near a mosque and reportedly entered to complain about the sound of recitations from the Quran being broadcast through the mosque's loudspeakers. The ABC reports he then leaned forward and spat in the imam's face. MacArthur is the second Australian in trouble with the law in Indonesia right now, with Bodhi Manny Risby Jones allegedly chasing and striking residents while naked in a village. The Greens are set to introduce legislation to the federal parliament that would freeze rent prices, with Adam Band vowing to block Labor's Housing Australia Future Fund if their bill isn't backed. One of the party's senators has now told the Prime Minister to shut up about his childhood story until there is a decent response to the housing crisis. Paul Lincoln Holmes has more.
As the housing crisis continues to hit Aussies, the Greens are now introducing a bill that would freeze rent prices for the next 2 years. The proposed legislation gives the Treasurer the power to overrule the Reserve Bank of Australia, as well as freezing interest rates. Greens leader Adam Bent has vowed to block Labor's Housing Australia Future Fund if their bill isn't backed.
Labor's got no plan for renters, and the legislation that it's putting before the Parliament at the moment takes $10 billion of public money, gambles it on the stock market. If there happens to be a return in any given year, then they'll spend that money on public housing. Last year the fund made a loss. And even in the best case scenario, they won't build any properties under this until after the next election.
Tasmanian Senator Nick McKim has slammed Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who faced protests yesterday. McKim said on Twitter that Albanese should shut up about his childhood story until he commits to raising income support and a decent response to the rental and housing crisis. He added that his mum would probably be living out of a car or a tent these days. The PM grew up in public housing with his mother, raising him as a single parent. The federal government is now expanding the first home buyer scheme to more people, including older women at risk of homelessness.
What they can do through this scheme is, with as little as 5% deposit, can get into home ownership sooner, and we'll save them tens of thousands of dollars because they won't need lenders' mortgage insurance because the government will guarantee that other 15% of the deposit. We have expanded the criteria. We're saying that no longer are we talking about just a couple or a de facto because we know, of course, that things are changing.
People who haven't owned a home in 10 years will be able to apply. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
More Australians have been evacuated from Sudan overnight amid the ongoing fighting. Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles has told the ABC another 17 Australians are now out of the country, bringing the total to 155. The federal government continues to say those who can get out of the country should as soon as possible. A new poll shows the yes vote for the Indigenous Voice to Parliament referendum is leading in every state. As it stands, both the national total and state-by-state breakdown shows the referendum would pass. Senior reporter Darby Travers has more.
What this newly released polling is showing us is that support for the Voice to Parliament is currently leading in every state. The YouGov poll of more than 15,000 people shows the yes vote is at 51% nationwide, with 34% against and 15% undecided. Now, unlike the recent news poll out, this polling does show that support levels in the two territories, the ACT at the highest level with 64% and 52% in the NT. The votes of territories only count in the national vote, with 4 out of 6 states needing to support the Voice for it to pass. Polling does show that it is on track to happen, with the lowest figures in Tasmania at 50, WA at 48 and Queensland at 47, but the yes vote still leads the no vote regardless. The Age is also today reporting a number of Victorian Coalition MPs will aim to get a free vote on the Voice to Parliament despite the formal opposition of the federal Liberals and Nationals. James Newbury, Evan Mulholland and Jess Wilson have all told the paper that they will lobby for MPs to be given a choice on voting and campaigning. Leader John Pesutto has not yet revealed his official position, while 2 state national MPs are also saying the party needs to settle on a formal position even after leader Peter Welsh backed the federal decision to oppose. It is understood those discussions among the Victorian opposition parties will take place in the coming days.
People watching next week's coronation of King Charles III will be invited to swear allegiance to the monarch. The Archbishop of Canterbury will proclaim God Save the King, with all people watching asked to respond, God Save King Charles, long live King Charles, may the King live forever. The historic coronation is being broadcast live to tens of millions of people across the world, including here at home. As well as Anthony Albanese, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be in attendance, but US President Joe Biden will not. And North American correspondent Wyatt Sharp has more.
I mean, it's not very often that you have a coronation of a monarch, specifically in the UK with King Charles III. Obviously, this follows the death of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, but it's really not surprising. I mean, of course, the US is far from being a Commonwealth country, far from being and having any attachment to the monarchy as a country like Australia or as a country like Canada would, in terms of its parliamentary system, in terms of its system of democracy. President Biden will not be attending. First Lady Dr. Jill Biden will be attending in place of President Joe Biden. And I mean, perhaps that is for, some specific reasons. President Joe Biden has had a busy agenda these past few days. He's going to have a busy agenda as well in the coming weeks, given that he has announced he is running for president in 2024. So perhaps some campaigning may need to take place. Perhaps some, strategy for his upcoming 2024 re-election campaign will need to take place. And when you look at who is attending the coronation for His Majesty King Charles III, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is going to be attending, as we just recently learned. Obviously, that's not surprising, given that Canada is a constitutional monarchy. It gives the Governor General of Canada, who is essentially the King's representative in Canada, some symbolic powers. Theoretically, the Governor General is the head of state of Canada, and that is very similar for a lot of other Commonwealth countries, very similar for many other countries who are also associated with the British monarchy. Queen Elizabeth was, of course, the British monarch. She represented, theoretically, she was the head of state for a lot of countries. She was someone who had a lot of people had a lot of respect for her, certainly for good reason. I mean, she was someone who a lot of people would argue represented the position of a monarch extraordinarily well, not necessarily coming off as arrogant as some, people may fear, but coming off as, very charming, very uplifting, something that is, I'm sure great for many people to see as a monarch, someone who really at that stage in your life as the queen or king of the monarchy, you don't really have to be super friendly towards other people, but you choose to be super friendly to other people. And that is certainly something that Queen Elizabeth did. It's something that King Charles will possibly do as well, something that a lot of people will be looking for. Of course, there is some controversy around King Charles III. So there is that component of things as well. But as you said, there will be lots of people tuning in, potentially hundreds of millions of people. It's going to be broadcast all throughout Canada. It's going to be broadcast all throughout the United States, Australia, lots of different places will be taking and carrying this historic moment live for their viewers. And I mean, the media critic, the media nerd, so to speak, in me kind of finds that interesting when you look at what's going to be happening, the behind the scenes aspect of things. The fact, as you've said, and as I've said, it hasn't happened a coronation of a monarch in the British monarchy for decades, I believe 7 decades or so. So probably longer. It's been quite interesting. It's been an interesting process, specifically the preparations for what's going to be happening. Of course, preparations have been well underway, essentially ever since King Charles kind of took over, ever since Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II passed on. Preparations have been underway. The big moment is what everyone's going to be watching for with the official coronation. There's going to be lots of things that we can look for, lots of different scenarios that will play out with First Lady Dr. Jill Biden there, as I mentioned, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau there, lots of representation from many other Commonwealth countries as well. I mean, a lot of people feel and question the need for something like the monarchy, and it's been an ongoing discussion, not just in Canada, but as you said, in many other Commonwealth countries like Australia as well, the conversation as to whether or not something like the monarchy is actually something that is needed. I mean, in a system of democracy like Canada's, with a constitutional monarchy, a parliamentary democracy, it is the lawmakers that make the decisions, the people who are elected by the people. And so when we look at what is and what really has transpired within Canada's electoral system over the past long while, we have seen that the British monarch doesn't really themselves play a big role in in the general day-to-day proceedings of democracy, of parliamentary business in Canada. I mean, of course, you do have someone like the Governor General, the official monarch's representative in Canada. It's a thing that a lot of countries have. It's a representative that a lot of countries who share a similar relationship with the monarchy have. And so, I mean, that's the component of it where the Governor General is the one who officially will sign and give royal assent to pieces of legislation. So super symbolic powers that the monarchy has, whether or not those powers, whether or not the investment in those powers is really worth it, is ultimately the question. It's something that the big conversation that was happening in Canada and in many other countries around the world as Queen Elizabeth II passed on, obviously remembering her extraordinary life, but also wondering how we move forward with the monarchy. Do we continue to have it play such a big role in our democratic process? Again, that wasn't a conversation that was just being held in Canada, but also really right around the world as well. And that is ultimately still a conversation that is being held and that will continue to be held months after, years after, decades after today with the official coronation of King Charles III.
5 people have been shot dead in the United States, including an 8-year-old boy. Authorities say the man was asked to stop shooting his AR-15 style rifle in Texas because it was keeping a baby awake. The shooting deaths have been described as almost execution style. Police had been called to the suspect's house on several previous occasions over other complaints about noise he was making when shooting his gun. Well, Australia's $1 billion banana industry is under threat. Last month, another Queensland farm fell victim to Panama disease, which is currently devastating farmers globally. But there is hope that this supermarket staple will stay on shelves for decades to come. Chief reporter Connor, our 4K, went on the ground and has this report.
Kim Daniel's banana business is a hostage to nature.
It's really something that is beyond your control. It is random luck.
Her organic farm in Wamuran, 1 hour north of Brisbane, is kept clean. Unauthorised visitors are kept out. But she knows a singular spore of Panama disease, carried in by a wallaby or a worker's contaminated shoes, could end it all.
It would mean basically that I would be out of business, yes.
Last month, Panama was found on another farm in far north Queensland. It's the state's 7th outbreak, since first being detected in 2015. All are in close proximity.
I can't do anything more than what I do. Yeah.
It's almost a sense of powerlessness to it.
Pretty much, yeah.
Panama kills the banana plant it infects, and because all Cavendish are clones, the fungus spreads with ease. There are only so many precautions farmers can take, so right now a global hunt for scientific solutions is on. QUT scientists have already pioneered a Panama-resistant Cavendish using genetic modification. A 5-year research project underway right now will attempt to use gene editing instead.
So this is where the bananas begin.
So that history doesn't repeat. Before Cavendish, Gros Michel was the dominant variety, a better-tasting, longer-lasting banana declared commercially extinct in 1965 due to Panama.
Well, newly introduced legislation in the Australian Capital Territory aims to stop irreversible medical procedures on intersex children. For more, lecturer Chris Rudge from Sydney Law School joins 6 News on Between Parks Place and Capitol Hill.
That's an interesting question that takes us forward to some issues that are not addressed by the bill and are left to the common law to sort out, because medical negligence, doctors make mistakes in terms of diagnoses quite often. The general law of medical negligence would still apply, I would expect, because the bill doesn't seek to make a mistaken diagnosis an offence. I think that's answering your question. There's no that it would be an intentional wrong diagnosis of a restricted versus a provable disorder, right? Because if it is the latter, if there was an intention to avoid, well, let me be clear. There are two provisions that make certain things offences under this bill. The first is to undertake a restricted treatment without board approval. And so that would be a situation where, whatever the diagnosis, you undertake the treatment without doing what the bill requires practitioners, hospitals, etc., to do, which is to propose it to the committee and to have that approval model play out. So there would be an offence for just avoiding the operation of the law, and that's an offence that, from memory, is either 1 or 2 years imprisonment and a fine. The other offence is if a person effectively aided and abetted a person subject to any proposed treatment escaping the operation of this law by taking them out of the ACT. So, for example, a person was because of, for whatever reason, and then the parents or anyone else took the person out of the ACT, drove up to New South Wales, etc., and then got a treatment for the intersex condition in New South Wales without going through the board process. If you did that, and I assume you would have to, in a criminal context, prove that there was an intention to escape the operation of this proposed law, as well as kind of you've actually done that, mens rea and actus reus, your mental element, your physical element. If both of those things were satisfied, it's a 2-year imprisonment max sentence for that offence, as well as the fine too. So they're the two offences that the bill proposes. There's no offence in relation to a medical practitioner, kind of wrongfully diagnosing an intersex condition. So the normal medical negligence common law would kick in, and there would be defences, of course, available to any medical practitioner who made an error of that kind, depending on the circumstances. But it's an interesting question, because if an unnecessary and irreversible treatment was non-consensually administered, it would be regarded as a clear case of a common law wrong, and a case of battery, and perhaps criminal battery in some circumstances. So that's my answer.
The case that comes to mind for me, of course, is probably Murray and McMurphy, which is it's a Canadian case, but it was where a mother had consented for a C-section, and the doctor found tumours, and decided, we're going to tie the tubes as well, which there was no consent for, and they said, well, it wasn't necessary, so you can't use it as a defence. And I like that this bill kind of preempts that and says you can't use that as a defence, because that's often what you see brought up in these sorts of consent issues.
Yes, the defence of medical necessity.
Yes,
is that yes? Yeah, indeed, and so this effectively puts that question into this shared decision-making model, and this supported decision-making model, where what is medically necessary is no longer kind of answered by the practitioner in the moment, in a kind of relatively if the practitioner is saying it is medically necessary, the situation can appear urgent. And so sometimes that will be correct. It will be medically necessary and the situation will be urgent, but at other times it won't be. And it's those latter categories that are the aim of the bill, really, because if a practitioner, for whatever reason, was to say this is medically necessary and urgent, and do we have your consent to perform the treatment, and it turned out that it was not, presumably some parents and children will never know whether it was or not. Some might discover later that it wasn't, which is a large part of many of the stakeholders in this area have said that's what's happened to them. But beyond that, this sets up a guardrail around this process. So, I mean, medical practitioners who have a long practice of doing particular treatments after diagnosing particular sex variation disorders will now kind of have to be guided by the regulations that attend this act. If it is this specified diagnosis, they'll know through the regulations whether it is regarded as medically necessary or not. And that's what the regulations do. And that's one part that's kind of there's still some, there's a proposed draft regulation that sets out a lot of complex, chromosomal, gonadal, and other hormonal conditions, and says, medically necessary, not medically necessary, etc. My understanding is that draft is not finalised, but it is online for kind of viewing and consultation. And I'm still getting my head around, because there's in excess of 30 conditions here. And so what I imagine would usually happen is the doctor identifies the condition, but now they'll have something like this. So you'll get less variation in whether something is regarded as medically necessary or not, because you'll have some actual, a uniform instrument in the ACT that kicks in at that diagnostic decision-making moment and might prevent a doctor from saying or suggesting something's medically necessary when it isn't on the regulations. So that's the kind of interruption in this process of diagnosis and treatment administration that the bill seeks to kind of, engender.
And of course, don't forget, you can see more of that interview on the 6 News YouTube channel on demand. Just search youtube.com/@6NewsAU. Now let's check in with Ivan Melly with a look at what's making news right now on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Tonight on WAMN News, damning statistics reveals public housing waiting periods almost double for young Western Australians, with commentators labelling it as a political time bomb for Premier Mark McGowan. An exclusive report coming up.
Plus, Perth's 24-year-old artist reaching for the stars. Melissa Clements' painting successfully entered as a finalist for Archibald Prize, and later Dr. Andrew Miller's comment. Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Now to tomorrow's forecast right across the country. Brisbane will be partly cloudy, 25 degrees. Similar conditions for Sydney, 20 there. Up at just 14 in Canberra, 18 in Melbourne, down slightly to 17 in Hobart. Adelaide, a chance of showers, also 17. 22 and sunny in Alice Springs, 23 in Perth, and in Darwin, a warm top of 34. A reminder of the top stories we're following on 6 News this hour, and the time for the 19th AFL licence to be given to Tasmania appears to have come, with the decision set to be finalised following a funding announcement for a new Hobart Stadium. The expectation is that Tassie won't enter the competition for a number of years, as details for the league's newest club are revealed, and the Greens are set to introduce legislation to the federal parliament that would freeze rent prices, with Adam Bant vowing to block Labor's Housing Australia Future Fund if their bill isn't backed. One of the party senators has now told the Prime Minister to shut up about his childhood story until there is a decent response to the housing crisis. And that is 6 News for this hour. There is more news 24/7 on our website, 6NewsAU.com, and on social media. Just search 6NewsAU to find us. More news coverage continues right after this. For now, though, I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.
The coronation of a king. As the world prepares to see a new sovereign crowned, 6 News has special coverage covering the latest developments live.
Reporting on stories here in Europe
to the impact here at home.
The coronation of King Charles III. Special coverage live on the 6 News YouTube channel and our website, SIXNewsAU.com.
Almost a year on from the federal election, what will Jim Chalmers be delivering in his second ever budget speech? Impartial reporting on what the Albanese government's decisions will mean for you.
Budget 2023. Special coverage live on the 6 News YouTube channel and our website, SIXNewsAU.com. When big news breaks.
It pains me to announce